This story goes back to when I was just a very young kid, about 5 years old. I honestly think that because of what happened that day, I've been a bit traumatized by it. I'm 20 years old now, and from time to time I'll randomly have nightmares about what happened. If I see certain things or objects, it'll trigger unwanted flashbacks or even severe anxiety. Needless to say, I've been working hard on getting back my peace of mind by going to therapy and seeing a psychiatrist that specializes in PTSD. Going back to the story though, about every year, my parents and I would go to Mackinac Island for a summer vacation. The place is a heavily dense forest, summer resort that has parks, towns, and is loaded with beautiful sightseeing. We all loved being out in nature, so this place was perfect for us. My parents usually liked to camp for the first few days, and then we would stay at the resort for the rest of the trip. After driving around for what seemed like an hour, we found a pretty decent spot to camp at, which was also really close to the water. As we're just about halfway through setting up our camp, my dad says, "Aw shoot, I forgot to bring the beer. You guys want to come with me to the store?" To which I quickly replied, "I want to go. I want to drink something too." He then looked at my mom and she said, "You guys go ahead, I'll finish setting up." I quickly ran to my dad's car being really excited about going to the store and getting drinks. The area that we were located in was extremely rural, the epitome of the boonies. It was a small road next to a body of water, and the opposite side of the road being dense forestry. As we're driving to our destination, I notice that the sun is going down. The sky has this really ominous tone to it, with the color being a sort of mixture between dark yellow and orange, while getting progressively darker out. About 10 minutes into the drive, we begin to hear something heavy dragging from the bottom of the car. My dad pulls over and immediately gets out of the car to see what the problem is. After his inspection of the vehicle, he opens up the driver door and says to me, "Sit tight, kid, it's gonna take me a bit to fix the car." After he tells me this, he then grabs his tools and car jack, gets under the car and begins his work. As he's working on the vehicle, I start to look at the forest that's on the side of the road. I was honestly kind of alarmed by how dark it was starting to get outside. And that's when I see it. I could see someone slowly coming out from behind the trees. The more this person was edging towards us, the more clearly I could see them. I froze in fear when I saw that it was a middle-aged woman. The more disturbing part is that she had a knife in her hand and she was covered in blood, along with being barefoot and looking like she was malnourished. I started crying when I saw her creep out from the trees and start to crouch walk towards the car. She's looking right at me and comes directly up to the window that I'm sitting next to. The most horrific part that I can remember is that as she came up to the window with her eyes really wide, she let out a disgusting smile. At this point I was screaming in fear and I was afraid for my life. My dad immediately got up and checked on me to see what was wrong, but by the time he did, the woman had disappeared. I was camping alone by a nearby lake in my late teens. I had basically bushwhacked my way to a remote part of the woods just off the shoreline of the lake. I grew up hiking and camping whenever I could get the chance, so I was used to hearing noises and calls animals would make in the woods at nighttime. Sometime after I fell asleep, long enough for the small fire to die to embers, I woke up with this immediate awareness that I wasn't alone. I couldn't hear much over the bug noise of summer, but then I started to hear voices off in the distance coming from behind my tent. So I slowly threw as much dirt and rock as I could onto what was left of the fire and waited. It sounded like someone was whispering, or talking in a low voice. I strained my ears, but the harder I listened, the more everything began to meld together. At one point it sounded like they were to my left, then minutes later, directly to my right. It sounded like the voices were tuning in and out like a radio. Kinda quiet, then suddenly louder. I laid there motionless and on edge for hours. I fell asleep for what seemed like a few hours after the sun started coming up, When I woke up again, I packed up and crept back out of those woods. Whatever it was, it just didn't feel or seem right. I was probably 16 or 17 years old and bombing home from a party on my skidoo late one night. If you don't know what a skidoo is, it's just a snowmobile. It was a full moon out, with a cloudless sky and the moon illuminating the hills and the trees of the northern prairie landscape. I darted between forests along a trail I knew well. Ahead was a river, but my trail crossed it in a place that was reliably frozen solid, especially in cold Februaries like this one. As I approached the river, my trail was a narrow path woven between poplar and black spruce. All of a sudden, a freakishly tall silhouette of a person came out of nowhere. Silver in the moonlight stepped into my trail, completely blocking my path. I then hit the brakes, nearly flying over my handlebars, and skidded to a spot just before the river. I was shaking in fear. I looked up into the bush and saw absolutely no evidence of a person anywhere. I figured that maybe I was just tired and shouldn't have had those extra beers earlier on in the night. I was still a bit out of sorts as I sat back down and slowly started approaching the river. The most disturbing part is, as soon as I laid my eyes on the river, it was completely opened. Had I not stopped, I would have hit the open water, going too fast to stop in time, and a sled too small and too slow to cross it. I would have sank into the water, all alone at -20 degrees. Even if I did make it out of there, nobody would have been able to help me, and I surely would have died. I have no explanation of the silhouette I saw in the woods. I'm pretty skeptical and I don't believe in ghosts, but whatever that thing was, it saved my life. My friends and I can become a bit of some tryhards when it comes to camping. And what I mean by that is, when we go camping, we'll travel out into the wilderness for 3 to 4 days, exploring new territory, and begin hiking back. This year, however, we were feeling a bit ambitious and wanted to make it a point to travel out for a total of 7 to 8 days, going a lot further than spots we've already been to. We packed as much food and supplies as we could for this trip. I would be lying if I said I wasn't nervous, but at the same time, I was excited. It was also reassuring that my friend John was bringing his handgun with him, knowing that our trip could be potentially dangerous. The area we would hike through was an off-trail reservoir in the middle of nowhere, miles away from civilization. It's a pretty amazing place to visit during the summer. You can go swimming, jump off waterfalls, hike to the tallest point of the hills, and generally appreciate wildlife and nature. Apparently, if you know the place well enough, you can find the remains of a World War II plane. However, being there at night can be an awfully creepy place. It has a deadly atmosphere. You can hear all kinds of bug and animal noises throughout the night. Although the stars light up the place, you can barely see in front of you. So we're 3 days into the trip and we've already covered a lot of ground. Far away from civilization and certainly no contact with other people. After a really long day of hiking and shenanigans, we set up camp, light a fire, and start drinking beers and eating food. Many beers later, I had sort of forgotten where I was, and was beginning to soak up the moment. My friend John had left the camp to go look for a place to use the bathroom and disappeared for a bit. After my friend Mike and I had begun to notice John's absence, he said, "Where's John? Did he get so drunk he started wandering off?" We both started laughing, which was then interrupted by running footsteps approaching our camp. It was John. John had a genuine look of fear in his eyes, demanding that we both stop talking immediately because he was convinced that he had heard something. John is sort of known for being a lightweight when it comes to drinking, so we started laughing some more, despite the look of horror he had on his face. We decided to sit there for a few minutes, saying nothing and listening intently. We didn't hear anything. So we just brushed it off as the alcohol making him paranoid and went back to conversing with one another. About 20 minutes goes by and I'm setting up my tent while John and Mike are talking. And that's when it happened. We heard a horrible, blood-curdling scream. The scream sounded like it came from a woman, and that she was terrified for her life. It was short and powerful, echoing throughout the woods. John stopped what he was doing and immediately started putting out the fire. We were all pretty certain which direction it came from. We sat there for what seemed like hours in silence, standing there in complete shock. And that's when it happened. A second scream is heard, except this one is a lot louder and a lot closer to us. After hearing that disturbing scream, I immediately got up and said, "Screw this, we need to start moving now." John and Michael did the same and we quickly rushed out of there. We were scurrying through the forest at night, trying to navigate which direction we should be heading in. The thing that still gives me chills to this day is when we heard the third sound. It wasn't a scream from a human or an animal, but rather some sort of Goliath-sounding creature, and the sound came from directly behind us. At this point we started panicking and began running for our lives. We kept moving until we collapsed onto the ground, exhausted from trying to get away from whatever that thing was.